and of course we mentioned at the start, right? I suppose we move on to Florian Wirtz, and that is yeah, still ongoing. Um, Although signs looking positive, and again, a feels like a different profile of player that Liverpool have gone after than well, in many ways. One, of course, in terms of sort of being elite talent. I can rarely remember Liverpool actually going out and considering that these sorts of sums of money that are being discussed. Yes, I know there was the Caicedo bid last, but that felt like it was
Completely
somewhat
different weight
more.
class as a footballer. Completely different weight class.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what I mean rather is I mean Liverpool showing the willingness to sort of pay that, but no, this feels because I was trying to speak to some other Liverpool fans about what does this feel comparable to, and I think I'd said Torres, but then I don't think Torres was even where he got to at the time Liverpool signed him from Atleti. I think he was very well recognized as one of the most up and coming players. But I think it was those couple seasons afterwards where he
I
became,
think he grew into Fernando Torres at Liverpool, really, as far as
yeah,
I remember. Yeah.
Van Dijk was. We kind of knew what Van Dijk was, but I don't think people knew what Van Dijk was. Salah certainly wasn't the case. Sadio Mane wasn't the case.
No.
All these players who became these kind of iconic figures, they weren't there. So I actually can't think of a player that Liverpool have signed like this. Stylistically, when I saw some videos of the player, I immediately thought of Thiago in terms of sort of, I suppose, maybe uh, the close control, the gliding around the pitch, the lack of shin pads, the there's sort of you mentioned it to me at the start that there's so many different players that you can see in him when you watch these highlight reel. Um, I admit to not knowing a huge amount about Florian Wirtz, but I mean, tell me, as you mentioned there, this is a different kind of caliber of player that Liverpool are pursuing here.
Yeah, I mean, I think among the players available in world football, he's the best player you could have bought, and he's
Yeah,
also he's in that category of footballer where when someone tells you what the asking price is for him, you just pay it because there's no argument. It's just this is the talent, this is the player, this is the price. Pay it, or you don't have him, and the right decision always is to pay it. He's probably among the very best players I've seen live, just as a spectacle. Forget sort of the data and his statistical output, just in terms of the players that I've got to watch from the stands. Now, all Tottenham lull aside, um, that's a list that includes Luka Modric, so it's pretty good company. Um, and I think the difference with someone like Thiago was, that there are some kind of a few similarities. Is Fitz has this relentless appetite to attack. He's a very optimistic, ambitious footballer. So he's not someone that if he can find a gap in a defense, he will try and find the gap in the defense. He's not someone that will simply recycle the ball. He's not someone that will ever just um, pass the responsibility to find. He won't pass the responsibility to a teammate to find the pass that changes the game. He wants it. Always wants that responsibility. He wants kind of yeah, just to keep going forward. And aesthetically, he's yeah, he's so rhythmic the way he touches, even the way he plays. He's got a first touch to die for. One of the best first touches I've ever seen. Not because not just in its kind of the way he kills the ball, but what he does with it. So when he was younger, he spoke about how when he moved up to Bayer Leverkusen's first team, at the time he made his first team debut, he was the youngest Bundesliga player in history. Um, but when he first joined the training sessions, he was a very, very skillful player, had all the attributes that you see now. But a couple of the senior boys there said to him, with your first touch, it's not about how good your first touch is. It's about your first touch, you need to be gone. Every time you get it, you need to be gone and moving into a better position to attack. And that's the thing when you watch him play, just how well he moves the ball to kind of create opportunities for himself to either play a pass or to shoot. I spoke to the St. Pauli captain, Jackson Irvine, who played against him this season for an article that's, by the time this is released, will be out on the Athletic. And I said, "What is it like to play against him?" And he said, "Well, the first thing is like, he's a great player, but I'm kind of glad to see the back of him as a defensive midfielder in this league. Like, it's a nightmare because he works incredibly hard to find spaces. Now, if you watch him in stadium, and it probably doesn't come across on TV, he never stops moving. He's always running. He's always trying to infiltrate a little pocket of space where he can receive a pass and hurt you. The other thing that Jackson said is that playing against him one on one is really difficult because you you can have him heading one direction. So maybe you want to show him towards the touchline, take him away from the penalty box. Jackson said he's got this kind of capacity to shift the ball and shoot or pass. It's almost like one motion. So even when you've got him going one direction, he's just gone, and it's like trying to kind of contain the wind. Like it's incredibly difficult. And actually, if you look at some of his goals, you'll see that he makes going past players look very, very easy. And he's one of those. You and I are kind of roughly the same age, so we'll date ourselves together with this. But do you remember when the first kind of Championship Manager games came out, and you'd find number 10 like players, and you didn't really know what they looked like, but you had a kind of mental image of what they might look like, and they all look like Pablo Aimar, basically, all of them, like without a question. Wirtz plays like that. Just it's the optimism and the ambition, and he's just an incredibly pleasing footballer. He's someone that gives you
Mm,
your money's worth. Um,
yeah.
and
And
yeah,
I think when you mention, I mean, Pablo Aimar, you mentioned number
doesn't really play like
10s.
Pablo Aimar, but like it has that sort of
Yeah.
like that kind of aesthetic. I say, I
No,
think.
I know what you mean. Yeah, and I think actually, yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of time for footballers who aesthetically it's just great to watch them play football.
Yeah,
That's why I brought Thiago up.
yeah,
It
of course.
was one of the things I enjoyed the most about Coutinho, a player who had his flaws and things like that, but was so fun to watch. Was just unbelievable. So very much looking forward to just yeah, like the
I think Wirtz is a far better player than Coutinho. Like
oh
I,
yeah,
I,
I'm
I
not comparing them in that way.
no, I just mean in the sense that like I felt like sometimes Coutinho,
I meant more in the sense of the futsal background, right? That he could
yeah,
the way in which he could manipulate the ball around. I think you're right from everything I've heard. Wirtz is levels above that, but I'm just going on what I've seen.
yeah, it's interesting. Like so, one of the things that came up in when I was researching the article was that so Wirtz grew up in Pulheim, which is about 30 kilometers from Leverkusen, so it's down on the Rhineland, and his first football club was is actually his father is now the president and has been part of that club forever. But an interview, his father was talking about Florian's first few years there, and he said actually his first coach was, I mean, they were all volunteers, so they all had jobs. His first coach was actually a mathematician, so habitually kind of took notes on training sessions and recorded what players were doing, and sort of actually by accident sort of recorded assists and goals when he was about 6 years old. And they kind of noticed in retrospect just how creative he was in a sort of pre-FB ref sort of world. But yeah, and also like he played a lot of football in the house living room with his sister and stuff like that, and
Hmm.
you know developed an ability to play in very, very tight spaces, and yeah, so
Yeah.
he has all the kind of the training that you'd require and the sort of instinct for that type of football.
One thing at times when you describe a player like that who has all that natural ability, you can glide around the pitch, has that technical quality, a number 10, if you will. You don't necessarily associate those players with also having the level of work rate it appears that
Mm-hmm.
Florian Wirtz has, and of course Liverpool fans from the time during Klopp to even now with Arne Slot, I was struck by just the number of times this season that Slot just mentioned running, and again I think lots was made of Slot's tactical changes and the way in which he switched things around a lot in the second half to good effect. But a lot of the time when he was asked to summarize the changes he'd made, very often he would just talk about, well, yeah, I think for 20 minutes we forgot that we had to run and you have to run. And it seems like Florian Wirtz doesn't need to be reminded that he has to run because the work rate's huge from what I've seen. So this is a player for whom pressing and the off the ball work is not going to be an issue.
Yeah, he's not going to be he's not a player that you have to carry out of possession at all. Um, Very honest. But you're right. I think also it's interesting because I think over our lifetime, sort of the requirements for that kind of player has changed. I just don't think a player who doesn't do that work makes it to the top of the game anymore. I don't think they get
No.
the chance because you can't have you can't have a freeloader in it any anymore, regardless of what they contribute to attack. You can't have a sort of Regalme type guy that sort of strolls around the pitch and just waits for the ball to come to him, and then is brilliant enough that you don't really care that he hasn't broken sweat. Um,
Mm.
no, he's not like that. He's a 10 in the kind of in the sort of anecdotal sense, but he's just a functioning part of a midfield too.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, again, I thought that PSG final, a wonderful illustration of many things, but the thing I'm going to choose to reference is the work rate, right? And
Yeah.
just the sheer work rate, the pace. And
Oof.
when Liverpool played them twice this season, obviously the one of the greatest goalkeeping displays I've ever seen by Alisson in
Mm.
in Paris to salvage something somehow. And then a much tighter game at Anfield, which, yeah, actually, weirdly on a different day, Mo Salah's a bit more ruthless, which you can't really accuse him of not being. Liverpool maybe go on to win that game, but the thing I saw across the two legs was what we saw in the Champions League final, right? The sheer technical quality, the pace. Rarely are Liverpool outrun or outworked, and it was a struggle to keep up with those guys, and it feels like that's what Liverpool are looking to do this summer. Is okay, where can we find energy from as well as technical quality? Let's bring it
Yeah.
into the team.
Yeah.
Of course, the rumours around Kirkez as well may or may not be completed by the time this comes out. But Florian Wirtz, I think one thing that I've seen lots of debates about. Some people I speak to are adamant that he is going to play on the left, and that Diaz should worry about it or Gakpo. And some people, well, no, he's a number 10. He's going to play as a number 10. Some people said, oh, he's going to go into, or he'll be a bit deeper in midfield. And then there's questions around what happens to McAllister, what happens to Gravenberch, what happens to
Mm.
Soboslai. I think people are more comfortable with the likes of Curtis Jones maybe still being a rotation option. But I think the likes of Soboslai and Gravenberch and certainly McAllister like sort of established themselves as first choice. I'm intrigued because of course there's one more hole in this Liverpool side you imagine with the search for potentially for a striker.
Yes.
I think Nunez is largely expected to depart, and you wonder how the club tries to respond to that. So I just wonder. There are, of course, there are still some outstanding questions there to be answered. But how do you see him
Mm.
fitting in
Through the middle.
through the
I
middle?
think he has a tendency to drift left, and he always will do, far more so than he does to
Mm.
drift right. I think what's quite instructive, Harry, is when you watch him play with Jamal Musiala for the German national team. So German national team
Sure.
typically have Musiala and Wirtz behind Kai Havertz when everyone's fit. It doesn't work quite as well because what you find is that whilst Musiala and Wirtz can swap roles and they can drift and they can rotate through the different positions, they both kind of compete for that central position naturally. And so it's one of the reasons I suppose why Bayern Munich might say, well, maybe great player, but maybe wasn't quite the right player. They might say that's a
Mm.
sort of never fancied her anyway kind of defense. But I think I made that argument in an article not so long ago, so hopefully no one goes and reads that, right? Um, but yeah, no, I think you want him centrally, and then you just build out from there. And I'm sure that's what will happen because you don't break a club transfer record. Um, you don't make someone the most expensive German player in history if you're going to go and if you're going
Stick
to go
him
and
out
Paul
on.
Scholes him out on the left.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, when I look at that Liverpool team, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no one who should be playing in that role ahead of him. I mean, behind him for sure, McAllister, Gravenberg, great players. Diaz, I like him. I think he's a good player. Jota ahead of him. I don't know, but I mean, I wouldn't be moving I wouldn't be moving him to accommodate anyone else in that sort of chief creating role. I think at times that he will be quite deep, like he will almost perform like a sort of a third eight at times, because his receiving positions are not. He's not just someone that's going to sit in the corridor in front of the penalty box. He's actually also a really, really good transition player. Um, if people get the chance, there was a game. It was Leverkusen against Bayern Munich in Munich in the autumn of 2023. If you go and watch that game, it was the 2-2. You go and watch, it's not Wirtz at his best, but it's a side of his game that was really interesting. Playing away from home, deep receiving positions, playing in a very fluid system, and being really, really productive on the counter. That's very interesting. So if you ever get the chance to see some of the highlights from that game as a Liverpool fan, do that, because um, Leverkusen are pretty dominant side in the Bundesliga, so there aren't a lot of opportunities to counter like that for them. But I imagine there will be for Liverpool in the Champions League, because you're not always going to be a possession heavy side, even um, you know against some of the teams you're likely to face there. So that's interesting as well. But I think as a 10, I certainly would play him as a 10. I think
Hmm.
you'd be diminishing him a little bit if you were not to.
I think it's probably an adjustment period for Liverpool fans because Liverpool haven't necessarily had a 10 for quite a while now. Max got the number at the moment, but and certainly can probably play there if he wanted to, but that's not what he's been asked to do for Liverpool. And certainly looking forward to those two combining in terms of just the game intelligence. I think that they appear
Yeah.
they appear to have.
Well, remember also, listen, there was, Leverkusen's attack has been pretty fluid. So obviously, when you talk about the kind of the title winning year,
Mm,
Victor Boniface, Patrick Schick in there as forwards, Jonas Hoffman, Amin Adli, Nathan Teller as sort of not necessarily like number 10s, but kind of supporting attacking players. Martin Terrier came in this season as well. Like you have guys that do a lot of different things and do a lot of different things around Wirtz in a way which kind of forces him to adapt. So it's not like you're saying you play as a 10, Alexis McAllister, you do something else. I think you can kind of combine something quite interesting there and create something that's slightly new. So he's not someone that you place in your team and it displaces everybody else. I think he has a preferable role, definitely, but
mm,
I think it's about tailoring and tweaking what's around him rather than sort of having to reinvent Alexis
yeah.
McAllister.
And we spoke about Frimpong's off the pitch character. I mean, yeah, much was made about the fact that I mean, you said Frimpong's could list the entire first team when he's talking about
He pretty much
friends.
did. He'd be like, this guy, this guy, this guy. Timothy Fosu Mensah is on his way around now. Yeah, I can remember. Yeah, yeah.
But I know certainly a lot was, as it would always going to be, made of kind of sort of the friendship between
Yeah.
him and Florian Wirtz as well. And I imagine that will be something that helps tremendously in terms of sort of settling in and having somebody like that there with them on that journey. But just tells a little bit about, I suppose that off the pitch kind of character, because when someone's getting sold for the sums of money that were discussed around this deal at 22 years of age and is largely regarded as the best one of the best players in his league, starts for a national team, has won what he's won already. Um, you'd be forgiven for thinking that could go to someone's head because that's
Yeah.
it's a huge amount of talent and a huge amount of reward for that talent. But just tell us a little bit about the kind of person.
Yeah, there's no ego or haughtiness to him. He's actually quite a shy, private person. Um, I think also I've seen a little bit of the way he's had to operate with the German media. I remember I went to a preseason training camp with Leverkusen a couple of years ago, and the German media was there was an event and he was in the middle of it, and they sort of swarming around him, going, "Why don't you play as well for the German national team?" And what's this, Florian? What's this, Florian? And he actually close up, he's quite elfin faced, and he looks very young, and you could just see the sort of like, oh, get away from me aspect to it. But he's from a very supportive family. His mum and dad are pretty much at every game he plays. I think his mum is at quite a lot of training sessions that he's been at. Obviously, his dad was one of his first coaches. His dad and his mum both contribute to his representation. and were
His
part of
mum's
this.
watching him. His mum's watching him at training sessions.
Used to. I
Oh,
don't think
okay.
probably, but like used to
So
come. I mean, because he was a local boy, and like there's usually, he's got Julie, his sister, but he's got eight half brothers and half sisters. So he's from a big family, and so there's, yeah, mum and dad are in the stands, but also so as like there's usually other members of the Wirtz family around. So I don't think there was ever an opportunity for him to kind of get ahead of himself or to to grow an ego, and he doesn't carry himself like that. He's very private. I don't think many people know much about his private life because he doesn't, you know beyond sort of putting out the occasional Instagram post for himself in like a bucket hat and on holiday, and he's got quite a few sort of commercial partnerships with Adidas and Pepsi and what have you. Beyond that stuff, like
mm,
he's not a partier. He's not a guy that will ever end up on the front pages of a newspaper ever.
sure.
Um,
So he's more likely to be in the sauna with Mo Salah after a game
exactly.
with the green tea.
Yeah, he's interesting because he grew up in a house without he said in interviews before he grew up in a house without PlayStation and Xboxes, and I think for a long time the Wirtz family didn't have a TV, so
Mm,
he was kind of an outside kid,
all good.
and very 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 humble person. And when I met him, he's I think it's just pretty good, but shy, as you'd expect, because this is still he's a very very young person, and people, because he's been around for a long time, people kind of forget that a little bit. But it's still a young guy
Mm,
moving to a new country. But he made a very interesting comment a while ago. He was talking about because his future has been this sort of saga in Germany for God knows how long. It's just tedious. Um, with like sort of members of the German media guessing at it at every juncture. Um, but he said a while ago, like there will come a time when I want to get out of my comfort zone. There'll become a time when I want the challenge of being, you know, not at ease. And he didn't talk about the Premier League, didn't talk about La Liga, didn't talk about Bayern Munich, but this is kind of that now, right? This, and yeah. So he doesn't like being shy is not the same as being meek because he's certainly not meek. Um, and he's not someone that I know people will say when he gets to the Premier League, oh, players will kick him, just kick him off the ball and toughen up. This is a tough player already. And this is a player who was undersized for almost all of his youth career, who often played the levels above, the age groups above, who has learned, to kind of look after himself and does not want for any ambition or, resilience whatsoever. Already come back
mm.
from a really nasty ACL injury, of course.
Yeah,
In 2022, cost him a place that World Cup. 9 months on the sideline. So he's made some pretty tough stuff, and he's surrounded by good people, and yeah, but just like I'm not sure you'll ever get to know him in quite the same way that you will Jeremy Frimpong. Different
sure.
characters, but very good friends somehow. Opposites attract, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, as you describe him there, there's a lot of similar characters who yeah, you feel like what I was saying earlier on, all that groundwork's been done to sort of understand, okay, this insanely talented player, but what's he like off the pitch? And there's lots of these like introverted kind of, well, not introverted is probably the wrong word, but like quiet, like off the pitch talents
Mm.
at Liverpool at the moment. They might seem larger than life in the game, but then afterwards you see these interviews and okay, quite quietly spoken, quite private. As you mentioned, not being seen coming out of clubs too often. Okay, give them some allowance over the last last few weeks, but that's not been the case. And
I think
one
what
thing you meant,
Harry, the interesting thing there is, I think actually, let me revise my answer. I think the honest answer is who is Florian Wirtz? I don't know.
don't know,
Like,
no,
and that's the thing, right? Don't know. Like, I know what he is on his. I've stood in a room with him. I've interviewed him. Like, I've spoken to him. Don't know. No idea. Just he's a
interesting.
footballer that's incredibly talented, and I suppose that's
Yeah,
the way he wants it.
yeah. And you mentioned earlier on the scrutiny that comes from the international level. You know, him playing with Musiala, another hugely talented young player, and it doesn't quite work as well for the national team. And of course, the other component of this deal, probably the last thing we talk about before we go is of course the fact that you mentioned lots of scrutiny about his future, what's going to happen with his future, where's he going to go, and Bayern Munich, like with any German talent, are often linked with the best and the brightest in the Bundesliga, and often get the best and the brightest. Let's face it, in terms of sort of securing those signings. Yeah, of course, in this instance, they haven't done, and much was made about maybe the reasons for that, and of course, people talking about maybe the clarity of the plan for him that was laid out by Arne Slot in terms of how he saw his role, the tactical fit, the vision for how he would develop as a player, and maybe it just wasn't as coherent a picture for him with the vision that was laid out to him around Bayern Munich. But also, as you mentioned, that desire to get out of the comfort zone a little bit that also factored into that. Just talk to me a little bit about that aspect of the deal. The fact that this is a huge German talent who's opted not to go to Bayern Munich and to take more of a challenge for himself. Yes, he's joining the Premier League champions, but it's a big change for him at such a young age. Just talk to me a little bit about that and kind of why you think that ended up being the decision that he made. But then also, I just one more question would probably be, we're not used to seeing talents like this from Germany moving at this stage in their career to the Premier League. You sometimes catch the end of them in the Premier League, or I remember Michael Ballack and all the
Sure.
focus on him when he arrived in the Premier League, for example. But very rare to see them at this age coming across and choosing to sort of play these years of their career in the Premier League. So, if you can talk a little bit about how it's being received in Germany, I suppose.
Yeah, from the Bavarian media, not well, um,
Yeah. Okay.
but then not in a way that's sort of directed at Florian Wirtz. It's more, and this kind of answers your second question, why I
Mm,
think Bayern have been accused of some complacency. They've
okay.
been accused of, and I'm not verifying that. That's just what I've read.
What's the accusation? Yeah,
Um,
sure.
yeah, and it's been said, oh yeah, I've heard the thing about sort of the tactical presentation wasn't as impressive as Liverpool's, and that Bayern kind of assumed that, well, of course, Florian Wirtz will want to join us. It's Bayern Munich. Um, I'm not sure how true that is. What I do know is that Florian Wirtz is incredibly impressed by Liverpool's facilities. I think there was a Leverkusen training session. Um,
The Champions League. Yeah.
yeah, and I think uh, there's an interesting context here. So when Florian Wirtz was young, so he spent his formative years in Cologne's academy, and back in 2001, there was an agreement between some clubs in the region, so Cologne, Mönchengladbach, Bayer Leverkusen. We won't sign each other's youth products for the betterment of the region. Let's not do that. Obviously, and there are different versions of this, but Wirtz ended up moving from Cologne's academy to Leverkusen's, and Leverkusen would say he was a professional. His youth contract had ended. Cologne less so, but that decision was taken, and all the kind of the vitriol descended on him because he made a decision based on facilities and based on what was my clearest route towards the first team and what would be the best place for my career to flourish and develop. And that he felt at the time was Leverkusen. And in many ways, this feels very similar. Obviously, it's a different stage of career and there's about 130 million euros worth of difference to it, but it's a facilities are better in the Premier League because Premier League clubs spend more money on facilities, and Liverpool's facilities compared to Leverkusen's different world. And the same with Bayern as well. Like if you've ever been to Sabine it's just different. Like the Premier League exists is it's the sunlit uplands of footballing facilities, just because of the amount of wealth there is there. The coach very impressive, like the type of players to play around, incredible. And so I think it's kind of it's a big hodgepodge of all those reasons. I think also don't overlook the fact that Florian Wirtz has won the Bundesliga. So traditionally, and I think this has become a little bit overstated in recent years because not many German players have recently done that move that Bayern are always accused of making, just plundering people's talent. More and more, they move to England. It's the sort of the footballing world order has changed to that respect. But also, if you're Florian Wirtz, you've won the Bundesliga, you've won the DFB Pokal, you've done both of those things unbeaten. The challenge of Bayern Munich is not what it could have been for a player 10 years ago, because he's kind of completed German domestic football already. Now, I'm not saying this is at the forefront of his thinking. I'm guessing, but it's reasonable. Like, if you're looking at what your career could be, you're thinking more about the Champions League. Who gives me the best chance of winning the Champions League? Who gives me the best chance of winning the Ballon d'Or? Is it Bayern, or is it a club in England where not only can they afford to sign me, but like they can afford to restock the team in the years going forward in a way that even Bayern can't. Remember, like, Bayern's transfer record is 95 million euros. And like, that is by far and away the most expensive deal they've ever concluded. And this would have, had they completed it, it would have put another, we don't quite know what the fee is, but probably another 40 million euros on the German transfer record. So that
Mm.
there is a difference even with Bayern Munich. And so, if Florian Wirtz maps out his career, it's the better bet, I think. And also, this is not a vintage Bayern. This is not a, like, if you give him the opportunity to join the kind of Schweinsteiger, Muller, Lahm, Neuer Bayern with Lewandowski ahead of him, different argument maybe, because you could see your route to the Champions League. If I was to say to you now, over the next 5 years, who do I think will win more Champions Leagues, if any? Liverpool, without question, Liverpool. And so that's part of it. And I also think, look, you and I have spoken about these things in the past, but I think also, if you're not in the Premier League, it's hard, right? You're not, for a player, I think, and I don't like saying this, I cover German football, but I think it's hard to really feel like you're really in the spotlight of the game. And I do appreciate that Paris Saint-Germain have
Mm.
just won the European Cup, but generally speaking, on a weekend to weekend basis, that's kind of where the action is, and it's the ultimate proving ground. And it's where you get the most attention, and it's, and for a competitive guy, do you want to be playing in the Premier League, or do you want to do you want to have if you play for Bayern also, and Harry Kane's just experienced this, you get your achievements diminished really quickly. I think Harry Kane's done wonderful things at FC Bayern, but it doesn't matter because Bayern is easy. Just, it's not true, but that still
Mm.
becomes the perception, and so it will be for Wirtz had he joined, maybe. So it's not one reason; it's all sorts of reasons, and I
Yeah.
like it. I think it's brave and bold, and I can't wait for the rest of the world to see how good a player he is.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bayern, tricky for them, bit humbling.
No, no, I can imagine so. Yeah, and it's I mean, you mentioned transfer records. I mean, this is of course Liverpool smashing their own record. It feels coming back to what you said at the start, right? In terms of, I've always had the impression that Liverpool's owners have been willing to spend if they can be given a case that this is a no-brainer,
Mm-hmm.
and they're presented with the data and they're presented with the case that you imagine similar to the business case that was presented to the player. There was one presented internally to get that kind of fee signed off, and but when that talent is there, they're willing to do it. They're willing to go for it, and yeah, it just seems like this is like the perfect opportunity for them to make this move. It's at times it's felt like, as though we've been talking about a kid's a kid's sort of move to try and get into a school. You know, okay, so he's gone to this school, got to this college. You know, they've got these facilities. He loves the swimming pool there. Like it's like all these like that's the way in which we're talking about. Yeah, because he's 22 years
But
old.
that's also the way he's been raised. So he's surrounded
Mm.
by his dad, as well as being president of Ferencváros's first football team. He was for a long time the head of youth there as well. This guy knows about development. This is someone that is, so instead of someone instead of an advisor who's just there to, right, well, where's the kind of the attention, like, all of these factors are in play, and it will be a very considered decision that has brought him here, rather than a kind of an instinct, or a, like a kind of, oh, we're affronted by Bayern's attitude. I think that's a bit simplistic. And I don't think it gives Liverpool due credit for the strength of whatever they were able to propose to him.
Yeah, and I think it's an incredibly exciting move. Like I said, I've many things I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see the relationships he takes up in the squad. Who's he going to end up gravitating towards? Yes, I mean Frimpong's there, but I could equally see him as it's natural to do. I know, be super close to one of the talismans that are that exist at the club. It's a very welcoming group, obviously, and it's exciting to see. I think, as you mentioned, for the rest of the world to sort of see just how good this player is. So, I mean, Seb, I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer about both of these players because they're very interesting characters, before you even get into sort of how they play football. But I get the feeling there won't be any shortage of coverage when it comes to sort of the Florian Wirtz over the coming weeks, months, years,
Probably
certainly,
not. Probably
and
not.
nor Jeremy Frimpong. So, yeah, I want to thank you for coming on and giving us your perspective and taking us down different avenues of kind of how these players got to the stage where they're at. But yeah, no, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on.